Colorado Territory, 1874. The shadow of Pikes Peak stretched long across the valley as the late afternoon sun gilded the grasslands. Frontier towns were scattered across the territory like dice thrown by a careless hand, each one struggling to tame the wilderness around it. In these harsh lands, a man survived by keeping to himself and staying ahead of trouble. At least that was what Finnegan Irwin had always believed. Finn, as most folks called him, adjusted his worn leather gloves as he gazed across the open range. At 25, he'd already lived a lifetime on the frontier, his youthful face weathered just enough to show he wasn't green, but still handsome beneath his light stubble. His tall frame carried the lean, athletic build of a man who spent his days in the saddle. The brim of his tan Stetson cast a shadow over eyes that had seen too much death for someone his age. "Nothing but loneliness out here for men like us, Rusty," he said to his chestnut gelding as they moved at an easy trot across the high plains. "But that's how we stay alive." Finn had learned young that attachments were dangerous in a land where nature, outlaws, and sometimes even the law could take everything from a man without warning. His parents' homestead had been claimed by fire when he was 16, leaving him alone to make his way as a ranch hand, then a cattle driver, and now a drifter taking whatever honest work he could find. The frontier had taught him that survival meant self-reliance and keeping your distance from others. The town of Clearwater appeared on the horizon, a collection of wooden buildings clinging to existence along the stage road. Finn needed supplies and maybe a job if he could find one. Winter would be coming in a few months, and he didn't fancy facing the mountain cold without shelter or money. He'd heard Clearwater was different from other frontier settlements, less lawless, more determined to build something lasting. But Finn knew better than to put stock in rumors. Towns were just places where a man could get supplies before returning to the solitude of the trail. As he rode down the main street, Finn noticed the usual frontier bustle, a mercantile, a smithy, a saloon with piano music drifting through its swinging doors. What caught his attention, though, was the small gathering outside the town's modest schoolhouse. A wagon had overturned, spilling lumber across the dusty street. Several men were attempting to right it while a young woman directed their efforts, her blue dress a splash of color against the brown and gray frontier palette. Finn almost rode past. Other people's troubles weren't his concern. The frontier was no place for heroes, only survivors, yet something made him rein in Rusty and watch for a moment longer. The woman's voice carried across the street. "Please be careful with those boards, Mr. Peterson. They're meant for the new desks and we can't afford to replace them." Her honey blonde hair was pinned back in a practical style, though wisps had escaped to frame her heart-shaped face. Even from this distance, Finn could see she was beautiful, with a determined set to her chin as she pointed and directed the men struggling with the wagon. It was none of his business. Yet Finn found himself dismounting and tying Rusty to a hitching post. "Need a hand," he called out, approaching the scene. The woman turned, revealing eyes the color of summer cornflowers. She couldn't have been more than 21 or 22, but there was a composure about her that spoke of responsibility beyond her years. "That would be most welcome, Mr. Irwin." "Finnegan Irwin. Most just call me Finn." "I'm Nora Vaughn, the schoolteacher." She extended a delicate hand that belied its strength when he shook it. "As you can see, we're in quite the predicament." Finn assessed the situation. The wagon axle had snapped, sending it tipping to one side and spilling its cargo. The men, a shopkeeper, an older gentleman, and what looked to be a bank clerk, were clearly out of their element. "Let me take a look," Finn said, shrugging off his leather vest. Within minutes, he'd organized the men into a more effective team, using leverage rather than brute force to steady the wagon while they retrieved the lumber. He then improvised a temporary repair to the axle that would allow the wagon to be moved to the smithy. "You've done this before," Nora observed as he worked. "Been on enough cattle drives to see just about every type of wagon breakdown possible," Finn replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "Out on the trail, you fix things or you don't survive." "Well, Mr. Irwin, your trail experience has saved our school furniture. The children have been sitting on crates for months." Her smile transformed her face, lighting it with warmth that seemed to reach right through Finn's carefully maintained distance. "Happy to help, Miss Vaughn, just passing through." Everyone's just passing through Clearwater until they find a reason to stay, she replied with unexpected insight. Perhaps you'll find yours. Finn tipped his hat, uncomfortable with her penetrating gaze. Don't count on it, the trail's my home. The repair complete, Finn was ready to move on when the town mayor approached, a portly man with a silver watch chain stretched across his vest. Young man, that was impressive work. We could use someone handy like you around here. Finn shifted uneasily, just doing what anyone would. Not anyone, Nora corrected, most would have ridden past. The mayor nodded, the name's Horace Tillman. We've been looking for someone to help with repairs around town before winter sets in. The sawmill's expanding and they need hands too. Pays fair and there's room and board at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house included. Finn was about to decline when he noticed a poster on the wall of the mercantile across the street. Ranch hand NEEDED spring hiring. The next cattle drive wouldn't start until April. 5 months was a long time to wander with dwindling funds. I'll think about it, he said finally. Nora Vaughn's smile widened. The school needs repairs too. The roof leaks something terrible when it rains. I'm no carpenter, ma'am. But you're resourceful, Mr. Irwin, that counts for more out here. As Finn walked away, leading Rusty toward the livery stable, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just done something dangerous, far more dangerous than facing down rustlers or weathering a prairie storm. He'd allowed someone to see him, to notice him. On the frontier, being noticed often led to trouble, yet he found himself agreeing to stay in Clearwater, at least until spring. It was a practical decision, he told himself. Nothing to do with cornflower eyes or a smile that seemed to promise something he'd convinced himself didn't exist on the frontier. Belonging, the boarding house run by Mrs. Holloway turned out to be a tidy 2-story structure with a wide porch and actual curtains in the windows, a rarity in frontier towns. The landlady, a no-nonsense widow with iron-gray hair and surprisingly gentle hands, showed him to a small but clean room on the second floor. Breakfast at 6, dinner at 6 in the evening, wash up before you come to the table, she instructed. No drinking, no smoking inside, and absolutely no women in the rooms. Yes, ma'am, Finn agreed, setting his saddlebags on the narrow bed. The schoolteacher mentioned you, Mrs. Holloway added, pausing at the door. Said you were a good man to have around in a crisis. We don't get many of those passing through. Before Finn could respond, she was gone, leaving him to wonder what else Nora Vaughn had said about him, and why he cared. The next morning, Mayor Tillman provided Finn with a list of tasks around town. Finn spent the day patching the livery stable roof, fixing a broken window at the mercantile, and helping the smithy repair equipment from the sawmill. The physical labor felt good after days in the saddle, and there was something satisfying about leaving things in better condition than he'd found them. By late afternoon, he found himself at the schoolhouse, a modest building at the edge of town. School had let out for the day, but Nora Vaughn was still inside, erasing chalk from a small blackboard. She turned at his entrance, her face brightening. Mr. Irwin, you came. Mayor said the roof needs patching, Finn replied, hat in hand. He noticed the classroom was neat but sparse, with rough benches instead of proper desks. A map of the United States hung on one wall, and a shelf held perhaps 24 books. It does indeed. Every time it rains, I have to position buckets around the room. The children think it's quite entertaining, but it's hardly conducive to learning. She brushed chalk dust from her hands. Today she wore a simple blue calico dress that matched her eyes, her honey blonde hair tied back with a ribbon. Finn examined the ceiling, noting the water stains. I'll need to get on the roof to see how bad it is. Of course, there's a ladder behind the building. As Finn worked on the schoolhouse roof, replacing broken shingles and sealing leaks, Nora remained below, grading student work at her desk. Occasionally, she would call up a question or comment, and Finn found himself responding more freely than was his habit. How long have you been teaching, Miss Vaughn? He asked as he hammered a new shingle into place. This is my 2nd year in Clearwater, she called back. I came west from Pennsylvania after completing normal school. My parents thought I was mad to accept a position in the territories. Were they right? Her laugh floated up to him, unexpectedly melodic. Perhaps, but I've never regretted it. These children deserve education as much as any in Philadelphia, or New York. Frontier's a hard place for a woman alone, Finn observed. The frontier is hard for everyone, Mr. Irwin. But it's also a place where one can build something new. There was a pause before she added, and I'm not entirely alone. I have 23 pupils and a community that values education enough to hire me. When Finn climbed down from the roof, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Nora stood waiting, a shawl draped around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Thank you for fixing the roof," she said. "The children will be disappointed not to see their bucket collection in use, but I suspect they'll manage." "It's a solid patch, but some of those timbers will need replacing come spring," Finn advised, gathering his tools. "Then I shall have to hope you're still in Clearwater when spring arrives." Her direct gaze challenged his nomadic instincts. Finn looked away. "Like I said, I'm just passing through." "Of course," she smiled as if she knew something he didn't. "Will you be attending the harvest social next Saturday? The whole town will be there." "I don't much care for socials," Finn admitted. "That doesn't surprise me, Mr. Irwin. But sometimes the things we avoid are precisely what we need most." With that cryptic statement, she turned toward the small cottage adjacent to the schoolhouse where she apparently lived. Finn watched her go, troubled by the ease with which she seemed to see through the barriers he'd carefully constructed. The frontier had taught him that survival meant keeping your guard up and your connections few. Yet here was this schoolteacher, suggesting he needed people when everything he'd learned told him that needing others was a weakness he couldn't afford. As days passed, Finn settled into a rhythm in Clearwater. Mornings at the sawmill, afternoons doing repairs around town, evenings at Mrs. Holloway's table with the other boarders, a clerk from the Assier's office, an elderly prospector, and occasionally the young doctor who served the town. Despite his intentions to remain detached, Finn found himself learning their names, their stories, their connections to one another. And almost without realizing it, he found reasons to pass by the schoolhouse. Sometimes he brought wood for the stove or offered to fix a broken hinge. Each time, Nora Vaughn greeted him with that same warm smile that seemed to reach past his defenses. "You should come in and speak to the children about cattle driving," she suggested one afternoon as he repaired her chair. "They're learning about how the West is being settled, and first-hand accounts are invaluable." "I'm no teacher, Miss Vaughn. Experience is its own kind of teaching, Mr. Irwin. These children may never leave Colorado territory. Your stories could show them a broader world." Against his better judgment, Finn found himself agreeing. The following day, he stood awkwardly before 23 children ranging from 6 to 16, describing life on a cattle drive. To his surprise, once he began speaking about the things he knew, reading weather patterns, navigating by stars, handling cattle, the words came easily. The children's eager questions and rapt attention were unlike anything he'd experienced. "See," Nora said afterward, walking beside him as he headed back to the sawmill, "you have gifts beyond fixing broken things." "Talking isn't a gift," Finn deflected. "Connecting with others is," she countered. "For someone who claims to prefer solitude, you have a remarkable ability to make people listen." The harvest social arrived on a crisp October evening. The town hall was decorated with autumn leaves and bundles of corn, lanterns casting a golden glow over long tables laden with food. Despite his earlier reluctance, Finn found himself attending, dressed in his cleanest shirt with his dark hair still damp from washing. Nora arrived wearing a dress of deep green that brought out the gold highlights in her honey blonde hair. She wore it partly down, soft waves framing her face, a few small flowers tucked behind one ear. At 21, she was the picture of youthful beauty, yet carried herself with a poise that many older women lacked. "You came," she said, approaching him with evident pleasure. "I confess I had my doubts." "Mrs. Holloway can be persuasive," Finn replied, though in truth, the landlady had merely mentioned that the social would have pie, and Finn had decided on his own to attend. "Well, I'm glad, whatever the reason." She glanced toward the small group of musicians tuning their instruments in the corner. "Do you dance, Mr. Irwin?" "Not if I can help it." Another skill to avoid, like socializing. Her eyes twinkled with gentle teasing. "One might think you're afraid of these harmless frontier pastimes." The challenge in her voice was unmistakable. Finn found himself extending his hand. "One dance, Miss Vaughn." As they joined the other couples on the floor, Finn was acutely aware of Nora's hand in his, the other resting lightly on his shoulder. The musicians struck up a waltz, and Finn surprised himself by remembering the steps his mother had taught him long ago. "You dance quite well for someone who avoids it," Nora observed, following his lead with natural grace. "My mother insisted I learn, said even cowboys should know how to behave in civilized company." "She sounds like a wise woman." She was. The admission slipped out before he could stop it. "Fire took our homestead when I was 16. Both my parents." Nora's hand tightened on his. "I'm sorry, Finn." It was the first time she'd called him by his first name. Somehow it broke something loose inside him. "After that, I learned it's better not to put down roots. Everything can be gone in an instant out here." "Is that why you keep moving, because you're afraid to lose again?" Her perception cut too close to the truth. Finn stiffened. "I move because that's what men do out here. We follow the work." "Some men," she corrected gently. "Others build homes, communities, futures. The frontier doesn't have to mean isolation." Before Finn could respond, the music ended. He stepped back, disturbed by how easily she had seen through to the heart of his carefully constructed philosophy. "Thank you for the dance," Nora said, her expression softening, "and for sharing about your parents. I know that wasn't easy." The moment was interrupted by commotion at the door. 3 men entered the hall, trail-worn and rough-looking. The room quieted as they swaggered in, scanning the crowd with predatory eyes. Mayor Tillman approached them cautiously. "Welcome to Clearwater, gentlemen. You're just in time for our harvest social." "Ain't that hospitable," said the tallest of the 3, a man with a jagged scar running along his jaw. "We heard this town was friendly to visitors." Something about the men set Finn's instincts on edge. He'd seen their kind before, men who drifted from town to town, taking what they wanted and leaving destruction in their wake. "I don't like the look of them," Finn murmured to Nora. "Sheriff Collins is away checking on a homestead dispute," she whispered back. "He won't be back until tomorrow." The scarred man's gaze landed on Nora, his eyes lingering in a way that made Finn's jaw tighten. The stranger nudged his companions and nodded in her direction. "Might I have the next dance, ma'am?" the man called across the room to Nora. Before she could respond, Finn stepped forward, placing himself between Nora and the newcomers. "The ladies' dance card is full." The tension in the room thickened. The stranger's hand drifted toward his holstered pistol. "Didn't hear her say so." Mayor Tillman intervened, his voice overly jovial. "Plenty of food and drink for everyone, and many ladies present who'd welcome a dance partner." After a tense moment, the scarred man shrugged and moved toward the refreshment table with his companions. But his eyes remained fixed on Nora, and Finn knew this wasn't over. "You shouldn't have done that," Nora said quietly. "I could have declined politely." "Men like that don't understand polite," Finn replied. "I've seen their kind before. They're trouble. And you've appointed yourself my protector." There was a challenge in her voice, but also a warmth that caught him off guard. "Just trying to prevent trouble for the town." Of course, her smile suggested she didn't believe him. "Since my dance card is apparently full, perhaps you should claim the next dance as well." Despite the potential threat across the room, Finn found himself smiling back. "Perhaps I should." As the evening progressed, Finn kept a watchful eye on the 3 strangers. They drank heavily and behaved with increasing rowdiness, but stopped short of causing real trouble. Still, Finn made sure Nora was never alone, escorting her when she wanted refreshments and dancing with her twice more. "You're quite the gentleman when you put your mind to it, Mr. Irwin," she teased during their 3rd dance. "Don't get used to it," he replied, though without his usual edge. "Oh, I wouldn't dare." Her eyes sparkled in the lantern light. "A drifter like you could ride out of town any day, though you've managed to stay nearly 3 weeks already, something of a record, I suspect." "The repairs aren't finished," he said lamely. "Of course. It's purely professional commitment keeping you in Clearwater." The social wound down around midnight. Finn insisted on walking Nora home to her cottage, despite her protests that she'd made the short walk alone countless times. "Those men are still in town," he reminded her. "No sense taking chances." The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. their breath fogged in the autumn air as they walked the short distance to her cottage. "Thank you for the dances," Nora said as they reached her door. "And for your concern, though I maintain I would have managed those men perfectly well on my own." "I don't doubt it," Finn admitted. "You strike me as someone who can handle most situations." High praise from a man who prides himself on self-sufficiency. She paused, studying his face in the moonlight. "Why did you really stay in Clearwater, Finn, and don't tell me it's just for the work?" The question caught him unprepared. In the silver light with her eyes searching his, Finn found he couldn't retreat behind his usual defenses. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "Something about this place feels different." "Not the place," Nora said softly. "You feel different here. I see it in how you interact with the townspeople, the children. You're allowing yourself to connect. That's dangerous thinking on the frontier." "Is it, or is isolation the greater danger?" She reached out, briefly touching his arm. "Good night, Finnegan Irwin." "Thank you for the escort home." Finn tipped his hat, unable to find the right words to respond. As he walked back to the boarding house, her question echoed in his mind. Why had he stayed? The practical reasons he'd given himself, winter approaching, steady work, decent pay, suddenly seemed like excuses. The truth was both simpler and more frightening. For the first time since his parents died, he'd found a place where he felt like more than just a drifter passing through, and that terrified him. The following week brought the first snow of the season, earlier than expected. Finn woke to a world transformed, white blanketing the town and surrounding hills. At the sawmill, work slowed as they dealt with frozen equipment and slippery conditions. By midday, the foreman sent everyone home. No sense risking frostbite, weather like this, best to be indoors. Walking back through town, Finn noticed children being dismissed early from the schoolhouse. They erupted into the snow with gleeful shouts, immediately beginning to construct snowballs and crude forts. Nora stood in the doorway watching them, wrapped in a heavy shawl. She smiled when she spotted Finn approaching. "Early dismissal at the mill too," she called. "Too cold for the equipment," Finn confirmed, stomping snow from his boots as he reached the schoolhouse steps. "Sending the children home is wise. Storm's going to get worse before it gets better." Nora nodded, her cheeks pink from the cold. "I've told them all to go straight home, but you know how children are with the first snow." A movement down the street caught Finn's attention. The three strangers from the social were emerging from the saloon, unsteady on their feet despite the early hour. The scarred leader pointed toward the schoolyard, saying something that made his companions laugh. Finn's instincts prickled with warning. "Those men are still in town." "They've been drinking at the saloon since the social," Nora said, her expression troubled. "There was an incident yesterday, something about cheating at cards. Sheriff Collins spoke with them but couldn't prove anything." The men were now walking toward the schoolyard, their intentions unclear. Finn stepped closer to Nora, scanning the area. Most of the children were already dispersing, heading home through the snow, but a few of the older boys remained, engaged in a snowball fight. "Get inside and lock the door," Finn told Nora quietly. "I don't like how those men are watching the children." For once she didn't argue. "Be careful, Finn." Finn moved casually toward the remaining children, keeping the strangers in his peripheral vision. "Time to head home, boys," he called. "Storm's picking up." The three men changed course, intercepting the oldest boy, 14-year-old Tommy Miller, son of the town's doctor. The scarred man grabbed the boy's arm. "What's your hurry, kid?" the stranger drawled. "We're just looking for some fun." Finn closed the distance in long strides. "Let him go." The scarred man looked up, recognition dawning. "Well, if it ain't the dancing cowboy from the social." His grip on Tommy tightened. "This ain't your business." "I'm making it my business." Finn's voice was level, but his posture made it clear he wasn't backing down. "The boy needs to get home before the storm worsens." "Maybe we want company," said one of the other men, a wiry fellow with rotting teeth. "Gets lonely on the trail." Tommy struggled against the scarred man's grip. "Let me go." "Sounds like he doesn't want your company," Finn said. He glanced at the other boys still watching wide-eyed. "Rest of you get home now." The children scattered, leaving Finn facing the three men with Tommy still in their grip. "3 against 1, Cowboy," the scarred man taunted. "Bad odds." Let the boy go and it stays peaceful, Finn warned. Start trouble in this town and you'll regret it. The third man, who had remained silent until now, spat in the snow. Who's gonna make us regret it, that fat excuse for a sheriff? Movement behind the men caught Finn's attention. Several townsmen were approaching, the blacksmith with his hammer still in hand, the mercantile owner, and 2 sawmill workers who had followed Finn from the mill. The scarred man noticed Finn's gaze shift and glanced back, cursing when he saw the reinforcements. He shoved Tommy away. Just having some fun, no need to get riled up. Your kind of fun isn't welcome here, Finn said. Time for you to move on. We'll leave when we're good and ready, the scarred man retorted, but there was less conviction in his voice as the townsmen surrounded them. The blacksmith stepped forward, his massive arms folded across his chest. The stage leaves for Denver tomorrow morning. I suggest you be on it. Outnumbered, the strangers retreated, but the look the scarred man gave Finn promised this wasn't over. Once they were gone, Finn turned to Tommy. You all right, son? The boy nodded, trying to appear brave despite his obvious fear. Yes, sir, thanks for stepping in. Get on home now. Your pa will be wondering where you are. As the townsmen dispersed, Finn noticed Nora watching from the schoolhouse doorway. She had disobeyed his instruction to stay inside, but he couldn't find it in himself to be angry. The look of relief and admiration on her face stirred something he'd kept dormant for years. That was brave, she said when he approached, but dangerous. Men like that only understand one thing, that someone's willing to stand up to them. Finn brushed snow from his coat. But they'll be looking for revenge now. They won't leave town quietly. Should we tell Sheriff Collins? Already planning to, Finn glanced at the darkening sky. Storm's getting worse. You should get home and secure your cottage. Will you check on me later? The question was practical, but something in her eyes suggested it was more than concern about the storm prompting it. I will, Finn promised before he could think better of it. The blizzard intensified through the afternoon. Finn spoke with Sheriff Collins, who promised to keep watch on the strangers, then helped several townspeople secure loose items and check on elderly residents. By evening, snow was piling high against buildings and the wind howled through the streets. True to his word, Finn made his way to Nora's cottage as darkness fell, fighting through knee-deep snow and biting wind. Relief washed over him when he saw lamplight glowing in her windows. She answered his knock immediately, as if she'd been waiting. Finn. I was worried you wouldn't make it through this storm. Said I would. He stepped inside, stomping snow from his boots. Her cottage was small but comfortable, with a cheerful fire in the hearth and books stacked on nearly every surface. Let me take your coat, she offered. I have coffee brewing. The domesticity of the moment struck Finn with unexpected force, the warm room, Nora's concerned attention, the sense of being welcomed somewhere. It felt dangerously like belonging. I can't stay, he said, even as he allowed her to take his snow-crusted coat. Just wanted to make sure you were safe. The cottage is sturdy and I have plenty of firewood, she assured him, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. But I'm glad for the company. Blizzards are lonely affairs. Finn accepted the coffee, warming his hands on the mug. Sheriff's keeping an eye on those men, but be extra careful until they're gone. They frightened you today, Nora observed. Not for yourself, but for Tommy and the others. I've seen what men like that are capable of, Finn admitted. The frontier attracts those looking for places with less law, less consequence. Is that why you came west? Her question was gentle, curious rather than accusing. Were you seeking less consequence? No, the answer came without hesitation. I came because there was nothing left for me back east after the fire. The frontier was a place to exist, I suppose. To survive. But not to live. Nora sat across from him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. There's a difference, you know. Is there, on the frontier, survival is living? No, Finn, survival is just not dying, she leaned forward. Living is having purpose, connection, meaning, the things you've been avoiding by keeping on the move. Her words hit too close to truths he'd buried deep. Finn set down his coffee. I should go, storm or no storm, Mrs. Holloway locks the doors at 9. Disappointment flashed across Nora's face, but she nodded. Of course, thank you for checking on me. As Finn retrieved his coat, a tremendous gust of wind rattled the cottage windows. The flames in the hearth flickered wildly, and somewhere outside came the sound of splintering wood. What was that? Nora moved to the window, peering into the swirling snow. Finn joined her, struggling to see through the white darkness. A shape moved across the schoolyard, three shapes illuminated briefly by a lantern. The strangers, he said grimly, they're heading toward the schoolhouse. Why would they? Nora gasped. My classroom stores, we just received supplies for winter, new books, paper, even a small safe with the school funds. Finn was already pulling his coat back on. Stay here and lock the door behind me. I will not. Nora reached for her own coat. That schoolhouse is my responsibility. Nora, we don't have time to argue, she insisted, wrapping a scarf around her neck. Those men are desecrating my school. Recognizing the futility of arguing with her, Finn relented. Stay behind me, and if there's trouble, you run back here immediately. They pushed out into the storm, fighting through the blinding snow toward the schoolhouse. As they drew closer, they could see the front door standing open, swinging in the wind. Light moved inside, lanterns carried by the intruders. Finn motioned for Nora to stay back as he approached the door. Inside, the three men were ransacking the schoolroom. The scarred leader was attempting to pry open the small safe tucked in the corner cabinet, while his companions tore through desks and supply shelves. That should cover our stage fare, the scarred man was saying, plus some extra for the trouble that Cowboy caused us. Finn stepped into the doorway, snow falling from his shoulders. You boys lost. Schoolhouse is closed. The men spun around, the scarred leader dropping the safe and reaching for his gun. Should have minded your own business, Cowboy. Threatening children and robbing schools, that is my business. Finn's hand hovered near his own pistol. Put everything back and clear out. 3 guns against your 1, the wiry man sneered. You ain't that good. He's not alone, came Nora's voice as she stepped up beside Finn, a determined set to her jaw. Get behind me, Finn hissed, but she stood her ground. This is my school, she said firmly to the intruders. And you are destroying what these children need to learn. The scarred man laughed. Well, ain't she spirited? Maybe we'll take her with us when we go, keep us warm on the trail. Something cold and deadly settled in Finn's chest at the threat. His voice when he spoke was quiet but carried dangerous promise. You won't touch her, you won't take another thing from this school, and you're leaving Clearwater tonight, storm or no storm. Or what, Cowboy? The scarred man drew his pistol. What happened next was a blur of motion. Finn shoved Nora aside as he drew and fired in one fluid movement. The scarred man's shot went wild, splintering the doorframe as he stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. The other 2 men froze, their hands halfway to their weapons. Next one won't be in the shoulder, Finn warned, his gun steady. Drop your weapons. For a tense moment he thought they would try him, then the wounded leader cursed. Do as he says. Ain't worth dying over. Guns clattered to the floor. Nora emerged from behind an overturned desk where Finn had pushed her, her face pale but composed. Get the sheriff, Finn told her, his eyes never leaving the 3 men. In this storm. His office is closer than your cottage, go. Once Nora was gone, Finn gestured to the wounded leader. Sit down before you fall down, blood loss will do that. You've made a mistake, Cowboy, the man growled, sinking onto a bench and pressing his hand to his bleeding shoulder. I got friends who'll come looking when they hear about this. Tell them what you were doing when you got shot, Finn suggested. Robbing a school during a blizzard, real heroic tale. The minutes stretched as they waited, the only sounds the howling wind and the wounded man's labored breathing. Finally, the door burst open again to admit Sheriff Collins and 2 deputies, followed by Nora. Got here as quick as we could, Collins said, surveying the scene. Miss Vaughn says these men were robbing the school. Caught them in the act, Finn confirmed. They also threatened Miss Vaughn. The sheriff's expression hardened. That's so, he nodded to his deputies. Get them locked up, we'll sort this out when the storm passes. To the wounded man he added, Doc Miller will see to that shoulder, but you'll be healing in a cell. As the deputies led the men away, Collins turned to Finn. Quick thinking, Irwin, town owes you. Finn saved more than just the school funds, Nora added. Those men threatened Tommy Miller earlier today. I believe they would have done worse given the chance. The sheriff nodded grimly. Seen their kind before, they drift through, cause trouble, move on, usually not worth a confrontation, but threatening children and teachers crosses the line. He clapped Finn on the shoulder. You did good, son. After Collins departed, Finn and Nora were left alone in the ransacked classroom. She moved about silently, writing overturned desks and gathering scattered books. You could have been killed, she said finally, her back to him as she straightened papers on her desk. So could you, Finn countered. I told you to stay in your cottage. And I told you this school is my responsibility. She turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. But I'm grateful you were here, I couldn't have faced them alone. The vulnerability in her expression cut through Finn's defenses. He crossed the room to her, stopping just short of reaching out. You're the bravest woman I've ever met, Nora Vaughn. Foolhardy maybe, but brave. A tear slipped down her cheek. I was terrified, not for myself, but for what those men represented, the chaos and violence that can destroy everything good we're trying to build here. That's why you came west, isn't it? To build something. She nodded. Everyone has their reasons for coming to the frontier. Mine was to help create a future worth having, to teach children who will someday make this wild place into a home for generations to come. She studied his face. What's yours, Finn? What are you looking for out here? The question struck at the heart of the emptiness he'd carried for years. What was he looking for? He'd told himself it was just survival, just the next job, the next town. But standing there in the shattered classroom with this brave, foolish woman looking at him as if he mattered, Finn confronted the truth. I don't know anymore, he admitted. For years, it was just about keeping moving, not thinking too much about tomorrow. But lately, he struggled to find words for the unfamiliar feelings. Lately, I've been wondering what it might be like to stop running, to find somewhere that feels like home, she finished softly. Their eyes met and something shifted between them, a recognition, a possibility neither had dared acknowledge until this moment. We should get you back to your cottage, Finn said, breaking the charged silence. Storm's not letting up. They worked together to secure the schoolhouse as best they could, then made their way through the blizzard to Nora's cottage. The wind had strengthened, driving snow like needles against their faces. Finn kept his arm around Nora, sheltering her from the worst of it. Inside her cottage once more, they stood dripping melting snow onto her floor, the reality of what had happened settling over them. I can't go back to the boarding house in this, Finn said, looking out at the worsening storm. Mrs. Holloway will understand, given the circumstances. You can take the chair by the fire, Nora offered, her cheeks pink as she removed her wet coat. I'll find you some blankets. The domesticity of the moment returned, but this time Finn didn't fight the warmth it kindled in him. He built up the fire while Nora made fresh coffee and found dry blankets. They settled on opposite sides of the hearth, the storm raging outside while something quieter but no less powerful stirred within. Why did you really intervene with those men today? Nora asked after a companionable silence. The first time with Tommy. Finn stared into the fire, considering his answer. I've spent years telling myself that staying uninvolved was safer, that on the frontier a man survives by minding his own business. He looked up at her, but seeing those men threatening that boy, I realized some things are worth the risk. Some people are worth protecting, even if it means putting yourself in danger. That's called community, Finn, Nora said gently. It's what separates mere survival from actually living. Maybe, he conceded. Though it's also what makes losing so much harder. When you care about people, places, the prospect of losing them becomes unbearable. Is that why you've avoided it, because of what happened to your parents? Finn nodded slowly. After the fire, I learned that attachment was just another word for eventual pain. The frontier's harsh. People die, towns fail, nature destroys what man builds. Easier not to care too deeply. Easier, perhaps. But emptier too. Nora set down her coffee and leaned forward. What if the potential for joy is worth the risk of loss? What if connection, even temporary, is better than safe isolation? Her questions pierced the armor he'd built around himself. Finn found himself considering possibilities he'd long ago dismissed. A home, a community, a life shared rather than merely survived. I don't know if I remember how, he admitted, to connect, to stay. I think you do, Nora said, her voice soft in the firelight. I've seen it in how you've helped this town, in how you protected Tommy and the school. Those aren't the actions of someone who doesn't care. The blizzard raged through the night, but inside Nora's cottage, something changed for Finn. As they talked through the long hours, sharing stories and silences alike, he felt the foundations of his carefully constructed solitude begin to crumble. This woman, with her quiet strength and unwavering belief in building something worthwhile on the frontier, made him question everything he'd accepted as necessary for survival. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving Clearwater buried under feet of snow. Finn took his leave of Nora's cottage early, aware of the need to protect her reputation even as he wished for more time in the sanctuary they'd created together. The following weeks brought change to Clearwater. The three strangers were transported to Denver for trial once the roads cleared. Finn found himself increasingly integrated into town life, no longer just doing repairs but participating in town meetings, offering suggestions for improvements to the sawmill operations, even occasionally joining in social gatherings without Nora's specific invitation. And always there was Nora. Their relationship evolved through quiet conversations after school, shared meals at the town's small restaurant, walks along the snow-covered streets. Neither put a name to what was growing between them, but the townspeople noticed. Mrs. Holloway's knowing smiles, the mayor's approving nods, the children's whispers when Finn visited the schoolhouse, all suggested that what they considered private was becoming public knowledge. As Christmas approached, Finn found himself helping to decorate the schoolhouse for the holiday program. He balanced on a ladder hanging paper stars the children had made while Nora directed from below. "A little higher on the left," she called. "Perfect, the children will be thrilled." Finn descended the ladder, surveying their work. The humble schoolroom had been transformed with evergreen boughs, paper chains, and candles waiting to be lit for the evening's performance. "It looks nice," he admitted. "Your students have been working hard. They're excited to perform for their parents." Nora straightened a row of small costumes laid out on her desk. "Will you attend tonight?" "Wouldn't miss it," Finn replied, surprising himself with the realization that he genuinely wanted to be there. She smiled, the expression lighting her face in a way that made his heart skip. "I'm glad. The children have become quite attached to you, you know. Tommy Miller especially looks at you like you hung the moon." "I just happened to be there when he needed help." "That matters," Nora insisted. "Being there when someone needs you, that's not small, Finn, it's everything." Her words resonated with an uncomfortable truth. For years, he'd made sure he was never there when anyone needed him, never in one place long enough for such responsibility to find him. Yet here he was, integrated into this community with people who expected him to show up, to participate, to care. And he did care. About the town, the children, and especially about the schoolteacher who had somehow broken through defenses he'd thought impenetrable. The Christmas program that evening drew the entire town. Parents crowded the schoolhouse to watch their children recite poems, sing carols, and perform a simple nativity play. Finn sat near the back, hat on his knee, watching Nora direct her students with gentle guidance and obvious pride. When Tommy Miller, playing a shepherd, delivered his lines without a single mistake, Finn found himself applauding as proudly as if the boy were his own. The realization startled him, this feeling of investment in someone else's success, this pleasure in a child's achievement. After the performance, as families mingled and congratulated the young performers, Mayor Tillman approached Finn. "Fine job you've done around town these past months," Tillman said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Wanted to talk to you about something more permanent come spring." "Permanent?" Finn echoed. "Town's growing, sawmills expanding. We need someone with your skills overseeing operations, someone who understands both the practical side and the business potential." The mayor smiled. "Pays well, comes with that parcel of land just north of the creek. Been sitting empty since old Jensen passed last year." The offer caught Finn completely off guard. "I appreciate the thought, Mayor, but I've always been more of a seasonal worker. Come spring, the cattle drives will be starting up again." "Think about it," Tillman urged. "Clearwater's becoming something special. Good place for a man to put down roots, start a family." His gaze drifted meaningfully toward Nora, who was helping a small girl adjust her angel wings. "Some things are worth more than the freedom of the trail." As the mayor moved away, Finn stood frozen, the unexpected crossroads before him suddenly crystal clear. Stay or go, build or drift. Risk attachment or retreat to the safety of solitude. Nora approached, her face flushed with the success of the program. The children were wonderful, weren't they? Even little Sarah remembered her lines, and she's only 6. They did you proud, Finn agreed, pushing aside his turbulent thoughts. You've taught them well. I had help. Your visits to the classroom have inspired them. Did you know 3 of the boys now say they want to be carpenters when they grow up? Her smile was teasing. You're quite the influence, Mr. Irwin. The weight of responsibility in her words both frightened and exhilarated him. Mayor Tillman offered me a permanent position, he blurted out, running the expanded sawmill operations starting in spring. Surprise flickered across Nora's face, followed by something that looked like hope. That's wonderful news. Will you accept? I don't know, Finn admitted. I've never stayed in one place that long, not since. Since you lost your family, she finished softly. But Finn, don't you see, you've already stayed in Clearwater longer than you planned. You're already part of this community. He glanced around the schoolroom, seeing familiar faces, people whose names and stories he knew. Children who waved to him on the street, shopkeepers who greeted him by name. When had this happened? When had he allowed himself to become woven into the fabric of this place? I need time to think, he said finally. Understanding softened her features. Of course, it's a big decision. As Christmas passed and the new year of 1875 began, Finn wrestled with the choice before him. The practical arguments for staying were compelling: good pay, land of his own, respected position. But it was the emotional pull that truly tested his resolve to remain unattached. The thought of leaving Nora, of never seeing her smile or hearing her challenge his assumptions, created an ache he couldn't ignore. One crisp January afternoon, Finn rode out to the parcel of land the mayor had mentioned. It sat on a gentle rise overlooking the creek, with mountain views to the west and the town visible to the south. Old Jensen's cabin still stood, weather-beaten but structurally sound. With work, it could be made comfortable. With expansion, it could be made into a home. As he stood contemplating the possibilities, hoofbeats approached from behind. Finn turned to see Nora riding toward him, her cheeks pink from the cold, her honey-blonde hair escaping from beneath a wool cap. Mrs. Holloway said you'd ridden out this way, she explained, dismounting. I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, Finn said, surprised by how pleased he was to see her. I was just looking at Jensen's old place. Mayor's offering it as part of the sawmill position. Nora surveyed the property, its beautiful land. Good water, protected from the worst winds, close enough to town but with privacy too. She glanced at him. A man could build something worthwhile here. If he were staying, Finn added. Are you? The directness of her question didn't surprise him. Nora had never been one to dance around difficult subjects. Staying, I mean. Finn looked out over the land, trying to envision a future here. I don't know. Part of me wants to, more than I've wanted to stay anywhere in years. What's holding you back? He turned to face her, knowing he owed her honesty. Fear, not of the work or the responsibility, fear of caring too much. Of building something, someone into my life, and then losing it all again. Oh, Finn, her voice was tender with understanding. That fear never goes away, not completely. We all carry it, everyone who's ever loved anything. Then how do you do it? How do you build knowing it could all burn down tomorrow? Because the alternative is to never build at all, never love at all. She stepped closer, her blue eyes intent on his face. Is that really living? The question echoed their conversation from months ago, but now it carried new weight. Finn had experienced enough of connection, of community, of Nora's presence in his life to understand what he would be giving up by leaving. I care about you, he admitted, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. More than I've allowed myself to care about anyone in a long time. I know, she said simply. I've seen it in everything you do, how you protected the school, how you helped the children, how you look at me when you think I don't notice. And that doesn't frighten you. Caring for someone who's always had one foot out the door. Of course it does. Her honesty matched his own. I've watched you struggle between staying and going. I've prepared myself for the morning I might wake up and find you've ridden out without a word." The image struck Finn with unexpected force, Nora waiting, hoping, finally accepting he wasn't coming back. The pain he would cause her by leaving suddenly seemed far more significant than the risk of pain he took by staying. "I don't want to be that man anymore," he said slowly, the truth of it settling into his bones. "The one who leaves before he can be left, the one who never builds anything lasting." Hope brightened her face. "What do you want to be instead?" "Someone who stays, who builds." He took her gloved hand in his. "Someone worthy of a woman like you, if she'll have me." "She will," Nora whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "She's been waiting for you to realize that you already are that man." The February day when Finn officially accepted the sawmill position was bright and cold. Mayor Tillman shook his hand vigorously, townsfolk clapped his back, and Mrs. Holloway announced she'd be losing a boarder come spring when Finn moved to the cabin he was already renovating. "Never thought I'd see the day," she declared over dinner that evening. "That drifter who showed up last October putting down roots in Clearwater." "Sometimes a man just needs the right reason to stop drifting," Finn replied, his gaze finding Nora across the table, where she'd been invited as a special guest to celebrate the occasion. As winter gave way to spring, Finn threw himself into preparations for his new role and the renovation of Jensen's cabin. The town pitched in, as frontier communities often did. The blacksmith crafted new hinges and latches, the mercantile owner offered furnishings at cost, and even the children helped clear the overgrown garden plot under Nora's supervision. On a warm April evening, with the cabin nearly ready for habitation, Finn and Nora walked along the creek that bordered the property. Wildflowers dotted the banks, and the setting sun painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold. "It's coming along beautifully," Nora said, admiring the improvements to the cabin. New windows gleamed in the twilight, and a freshly built porch wrapped around two sides. "You've worked wonders with it." "Still needs a woman's touch," Finn observed, "curtains and such." "Is that a request for decorating advice, Mr. Irwin?" Her tone was teasing, but her eyes held a question. Finn stopped walking, taking both her hands in his. "It's more than that, Nora. This place, everything I'm building here, it's empty without you. I want you to be part of it, part of my life." Her breath caught. "Finn." "I love you," he said simply, the words no longer frightening but liberating. "You showed me that the frontier doesn't have to mean isolation, that caring deeply, building something lasting is worth the risk." Tears spilled onto her cheeks. "I love you too, I have for months now." "Then marry me," Finn said, the request emerging with the certainty of a decision long made. "Be my wife, help me make this place a home." "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Finnegan Irwin, I will marry you." He kissed her then, beneath the open sky, on land that would be theirs together. The fear that had driven him for so long was still there, a shadow at the edges of his happiness, but it no longer controlled him. Nora had shown him that love could exist even in the harsh realities of the frontier, that in fact it was love that made the frontier bearable, transforming mere survival into truly living. Their wedding took place in May, with the entire town in attendance. Nora wore a dress of pale blue silk that matched her eyes, with wildflowers in her honey-blonde hair. Finn stood tall and proud in a new suit, the nervous twisting of his hat betraying his emotions until Tommy Miller, serving as ring-bearer, whispered, "She looks like an angel, doesn't she, Mr. Irwin?" "That she does," Finn agreed, finding his calm in the truth of that observation. When they spoke their vows in the small church, Finn's promise to stay, to cherish, to build a life together carried the weight of his transformed understanding. This was no longer the drifter who had ridden into Clearwater 8 months earlier, convinced that the frontier was no place for attachment. This was a man who had found his home in a town, on a piece of land, and in the heart of a woman who had seen beyond his defenses to the person he could become. As summer bloomed across the Colorado Territory, the Irwins' homestead bloomed with it. Nora continued teaching, riding to town each morning and returning each afternoon to the home she and Finn were building together. Finn's management of the sawmill brought prosperity to Clearwater, his practical knowledge and unexpectedly shrewd business sense expanding operations beyond what even Mayor Tillman had envisioned. One evening in late August, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Nora's head resting against Finn's shoulder, his arm around her waist. "I have news," she said quietly, "news that might frighten you a little." Finn tensed. "What is it?" She took his hand and placed it gently over her stomach. "We're going to have a child, Finn, next spring." For a moment fear flashed through him, the old terror of having too much to lose, of building happiness only to see it destroyed. But then he looked into Nora's eyes, saw the love and trust there, and found that the fear was overwhelmed by a surge of joy so powerful it brought tears to his eyes. "A child," he repeated, wonder replacing apprehension. "Our child. Are you happy?" she asked softly. "I know it's sooner than we planned." Finn drew her close, his heart so full he could hardly speak. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it. Terrified too," he admitted with a shaky laugh, "but mostly grateful. For you, for this life we're building, for everything that brought me to Clearwater that day. Even the broken wagon that started it all." "Especially that wagon," Finn agreed. "One simple good deed that changed everything." As they sat together, watching night fall over the land that was now their home, Finn marveled at the journey that had brought him here. He had ridden into Clearwater believing the frontier was no place for love, that survival meant isolation, that attachment was a weakness he couldn't afford. Now he understood the truth. In the harshest environments, connection wasn't a luxury, it was essential. The frontier demanded not that a man stand alone, but that he find the courage to build something with others, to create community in the wilderness. In Nora's love, in the child growing beneath her heart, in the town that had welcomed him, Finn had found not just survival, but a life worth living. The cowboy who had drifted from town to town, afraid to care too deeply, had finally come home.